Gotta start stretching for this.
There we go. All right, we are on now.
Welcome to Two Crazy Scoops Podcast with your hosts Ao and Tito, and this week we have special guest Gabriel Gutierrez. So have fun listening to about video games, Atari, Nintendo, all that fun stuff. So stay tuned.
Oh man, I don't know if we're gonna be. Are we gonna get to Nintendo today?
I don't think so. I think we're going to be packed with the Atari.
We're going to talk about Atari. How to play video games on a calculator.
We're going to talk pre-Nintendo.
Pre-Nintendo.
Nintendo was
Nintendo for another day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I jumped the gun on that one. I'm a little excited.
No, it's good. No, it's all good.
We felt it, man. We felt it.
This is what what Aaron wanted to do the podcast about initially was video games, because that's something we're both passionate about. But it's kind of hard to find a lot of people that have as much knowledge as you do about this subject, so to speak.
Firsthand, too, man. I was there at the beginning. I was like the prime candidate for, all that home console stuff. That's what's pretty crazy about it. When I was real little, so like I was born in 1974, and all of the home console stuff came about right around 75, 76. So I was just a little baby. But by the time they worked out all the kinks, Atari was the first main, Atari 2600 was the first main console that was like mass produced and like a lot of people actually had it. It's still really expensive, but I lived in a little neighborhood that wasn't super prosperous, and there was people down our street who had Ataris. So that was kind of cool. But before Atari, there was a bunch of other stuff. There was like, have you ever heard of the Magnavox Odyssey?
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't.
I haven't.
I hadn't heard it. That's one of the first ones. And then there was the Telstar, which was the precursor to the ColecoVision, and that was like a first one. But see when it started, most of the time, like when I was little, when you bought a video game, you bought one little unit, and that was the game. There was like no switching out games, And I don't know if you've seen those little Mattel handheld ones where it's just little blinking lights.
Yeah,
it's like little red lights, dude. Those things, we would have like kids like lined up to play those, because you could play head to head, like football. You could have one on one end, the other, and it was just little red blinking lights. And then the football would be like this little, like kind of a fading straight line. They all look the same. The players look the same as the football, but it was like beep, 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 and then you would just run, and we would spend hours playing this. So that gives you an idea of how hungry we were for any type of electronic game. And then there was a ton of those little LCD games. Like you're probably familiar with those too. Where it's like it's got the little LCD figures, and they'll have like they had like.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say Donkey Kong was a real popular LCD game.
Oh, okay.
And so you would just have the images of like the, kind of, yeah. You win. But it would just be these little LCD characters kind of going on the screen, and it was already, they were kind of already there, but they would light up whenever you would move, and then the barrel, same thing, and
Tiger used that a lot.
Yeah, and those like nowadays that would be super boring. Yes. Yep.
Or kind of like Mr. Game & Watch, like those.
So that was yeah. Yes. That's it. That's exactly. So that's what we had. So when Atari came, and it was like, dude, this one thing you could play like all of these games. It was like boom, like mind blowing. We're like, oh man! And then you buy these cartridges. And you just plug the cartridge in, it's a whole new game. I mean, it was just something. It was amazing. It was really, really cool. So that was like in 78.
Before we get like super into it, how does this kind of line up with like arcades, so to speak? Is this like during the same time as arcades being a big deal, or?
Yep. So the first major arcade game was Pong. Now, have you guys ever played Pong?
I have, yeah. But that's just, on a computer or something.
Yeah, so all it is it's two paddles. It's one thing here, and a little ball going back and forth too. That's all Pong was, and it was like a blockbuster. And they had them in arcades, because there was a pinball back then, but they would have a Pong station, and people would play Pong. I mean, it was like so well known. And I was just a little kid. Remember how popular Pong was? It was like the game. And so that was kind of the start. And then the arcade games that we're familiar with, like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, those kind of evolved at the same time as the consoles. So the consoles were always kind of chasing the arcade ones. Now the arcade ones, of course, were actual real computers, so the graphics were way better, and the speed and the feel of the joystick was always way better than the home. So it was kind of like, I would compare it to how when we were younger, movies versus watching TV show, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you had the TV actors and then you had the movie stars, right? They rarely intersect. You were either in the movies or you were in TVs. And so at that time, it was like, it was either an arcade or it was a home console game. And you never be as good as the arcades.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it worked, you know. But they always had this, like they had Donkey Kong on Atari and also in Intellivision, but they stunk. The graphics were terrible, especially compared to the arcade. You know, they never matched up. Pac-Man was terrible on the Atari. Like it was just, it's famous at how bad it was. If you ever see it, it's so clunky. The noises don't even come close to matching. The ghosts are, you know, I think, you know, in my thing that I had sent to you guys, we'll talk a little bit later about sprites.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you could only have 5 different things moving on the screen at once. Well, you've got 4 ghosts in Pac-Man, and then you've got the dots. Mm-hmm. So if you ever played the Atari Pac-Man, they were like blink. And it was because that was the only way you could make everything work. And it was just kind of a strategy, but it made for terrible gameplay. and it just always looked weird, you know. But Space Invaders and Pong, so Pong was the first one. Space Invaders was kind of the first, like it took it up a level, because now you had a bunch of ships that were on there, and you actually, you know, can move back and forth and shoot, and you had things shooting at you. So that kind of was the next one that took off. Now Space Invaders on Atari was pretty decent. It wasn't as good graphics wise as the arcade, but it was almost just the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
is that game a little bit like delayed when you're playing? Is that the one where it's like?
Well, Space Invaders is where you're the little guys. Now there's been different other.
Sorry, your internet's kind of going a little slow.
Such as. Oh yeah, you know what? Do you wanna? I want to see if I can get a better connection somewhere.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, you want to pause?
Yeah, I mean, I can always edit this out too. It's fine.
Yeah, we edited a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
The podcasts are actually usually 4 hours long. But we condense it to about 50 minutes. So
that's all that's appropriate. It's 50 minutes. And even then, that's questionable. Oh, man.
I could probably go to the other room, because that's right where the modem is. And so yeah, give me about 2 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
Take as much as you need. I'm gonna have to look up pictures of this stuff. Sorry. Oh, I see what it is.
2600. Yeah, so I didn't have one of those as a kid. My cousin did. Oh, I think he left. But my cousin had one. And I remember seeing it over his house, but I never really played it back then. I played it later on, like in the 90s. I remember going back and playing it, and they were easier to find, like in the you know, those resale shops like Bookman's, for example.
Yeah, but what was the earliest console that you can think of that you played? Was that it?
That I actually played was the 2600, the Atari.
Oh, okay.
2600.
I'm looking at gameplay footage of that right now, and I've never played anything like this.
Yeah, it's horrible by today's standards. E.T. I'm trying to remember what game
he talks about that one.
Yeah, I forgot which Atari that was though. That was for which one was it? E.T. graphics. I don't know. I have to look again and see, because he was mentioned in here. I can't remember, but it was horrible though. That game was terrible, and but it was nice. The nice thing about it is that when Atari kind of crashed, Nintendo kind of came into their space and kind of helped resurrect video games because the video game market completely got destroyed. It did. Atari, they just destroyed it.
Dumped on it and left.
They did. And then Nintendo kind of swooped in and took
Wasn't Atari started by the guy who did Chuck E. Cheese?
That I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was Nolan Bushnell. He is an American businessman and electrical engineer. He established Atari Incorporated and the Chuck E. Cheese pizzas.
Oh, okay.
Which, if you could imagine, that was a genius move on his part.
Yeah.
You can get kids to pay for pizza and video games.
No, get the parents to pay for pizza and video games.
No, the children. The children are paying for it. They're the ones that pay for it the most, Aaron.
True. Yeah. With issues later on in life, but no, it is interesting history. Now, the time period that he's talking about right now is like we're talking late 70s and then going into the early 80s. And Nintendo at the time, they actually had a system, but it wasn't, I don't think it came out in the States, but they actually had a system out in the late 70s too.
Really?
And then they did Game & Watch. I think Game & Watch was came out in 80.
But it's only because of Game & Watch that I understand what he was talking about with those graphics, where it's just kind of like lighting up different backgrounds.
Yeah, like the screen has already got the pictures.
Yeah, which I mean, you could buy those at the dollar store, little video games like that as a kid.
Yeah, you could. That's why I was mentioning to him about Tiger Electronics, because back in the early, I don't know how long I don't know how long Tiger sold those systems, but you can buy those little handheld systems in the 90s.
Yeah, they had them like at McDonald's too, didn't they? Or Burger King, like toys?
Well, eventually they got cheap enough to be there, but before that, you mainly saw them like they sold them at like Toys R Us.
Oh.
They were probably, I don't know how much they cost, maybe like $20. Because I remember I had bought one. Last one I bought was when The Lion King came out. I bought The Lion King.
Oh, is that like little bugs fall and stuff, and you have to avoid them?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I think I did play that.
Yeah. But the graphics are all burnt into the screen already.
Uh-huh.
And your movements just light up depending on where you're at. It was so horrible. Even back then it was bad. But the Game Boy was, ran circles around that. And that was even bad.
My friend, he had the first Game Boy, the one that wasn't even a Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
And he was like, we were like 5 maybe, and we went to go to dinner, and he let me borrow it. Mm-hmm. My parents found out that I had it, and they were like, how did you get that? You have to return it. You're going to break that thing.
Oh,
so
no.
I had to play it for like a couple hours, and I had to return it back to him.
Oh, man. That thing was a brick. You would have never broke it. I think one of those got launched to the moon, I think, at some point and survived. You should look at it. It's a story. It's a story about the Game Boy that survived.
Anyways, we kind of got off the rails here.
No, we were still talking about video games.
Yeah. So where were we? We were talking.
Yeah, where was I breaking up?
Space Invaders.
Oh yeah, Space Invaders. So that was like the coolest game because, at least for the home consoles, because it was as close as you could get to the arcade version. Mm-hmm. And so it was like the first, like, hey, we're actually bringing the arcades into the house, and it had a real good feel. And Atari, did a really good job with promoting it and, making it accessible. It actually came with the console. So everybody had Space Invaders. That came with it. So that was really cool, So Intellevision started coming around, and they were a couple years afterwards. They were like 1980. So Atari already had 2 years of market, just total market dominance at that time. And then Intellevision came in. So they had to kind of come in with a different angle of, this is the intelligent console. And the graphics were better. I mean, they had actual memory in the console. Mm-hmm. And instead of, because I don't know if you've seen any Atari games, but the guys were usually really blocky, and the Atari's sports games were terrible. They were like they always had three guys moving together. So they would like move across the screen like this. They would never run separately. They're always together. And again, with the flashing, and like the baseball, instead of being in the view of the batter, like we are used to seeing now, the batter was at the top. And so you were the pitcher would go, and then the batter would hit, and go, and it was just like this little blocky guy that would run the bases on it. It was just really unnatural. I mean, it just was terrible. and television comes along, and you actually get a guy like running, like you see his legs going like this, right? Oh man, we were like, whoa, look, it's actually moving. It's got legs, And the other thing that blew us away, especially with the football on Intellivision, was the screen scrolled. Now, all of Atari games were just frame, right? So it was like there's a scene, and like you'd have a game like Venture, for instance, which is kind of like a role-playing game. So you'd be in one screen, and when you went to the other room, you'd go up, and then it would be a whole different screen, and now you're in the other room, right? Now you come out from the bottom, and then you go do whatever you need to do, kill the bad guys, get the treasure, and then you go to the next one. So when football in Intellivision came out, and you would run down the field, and the field would move, oh man, we were like, whoa, how is this happening? It's like, what kind of magic is that? Because it just didn't happen. You just didn't have scrolling games back then.
In a span of how many years was this kind of like from when you started seeing like just the squares to the actual scrolling?
So it was Atari was by itself for about 2 years. It had pretty much dominance. And Intellivision was 1980. So the sport, all of that first year between 80 and 81, they had about, I think it was like 15 like what would you call them, like core games. They were made by Intellivision for the Intellivision, and MLB baseball and football was one of those. So it was pretty early on once the television, because again, that's what they were advertising, right? They were kind of bragging about, hey, we're the intelligent console. Smart people have that. In fact, I had mentioned them in my email with George Plimpton. Right, he was the spokesperson of Intellivision, and he was like this well-known author, scholar, and he had to sign a contract stating that he had played both Atari and Intellivision, and he had deemed Intellivision to be the better console.
Wow.
He actually had to. Yeah, he really did. Legally, he had to do that because he was being, and they interviewed him later, and he's like, well, what am I going to do? Their television paying me. Of course, I'm going to say they're the best console,
Right.
Hey, actually, but, we got about like, maybe $50 we can give you. Just tell us that this is the best podcast that is out there.
That's right. You got it, man. But I can't say it until it actually hits my bank account. All right.
Oh, just assure us it'll happen within, once we return on the investment.
Once the check cashes, hey, I'll put me on posters, put me on YouTube, whatever you want, man. I'll be promoting your podcast. But
you said that just George Plimpton is the writer of Paper Lion. I was not familiar with that.
So he went undercover in Detroit Lions locker room, and he reported on what it was like, because he was never really into sports. I mean, he was somewhat athletic, but he was always kind of the more scholarly type things, rowing and lacrosse and stuff. So he actually spent a whole year in the Detroit Lions locker room and just wrote about his experience. And so it's pretty interesting. But
before
he just
yeah.
But he fit right in, because that's what they were trying to portray, that it was better.
Yeah.
So this right here, if you look at my little screen, that's the Intellivision right there.
Okay.
And that's
the controllers
that's
built into the console.
They were in the console. It was like a little, like a telephone line curly connection to it, and it had a little disc, and that disc is what replaced the joystick. So you moved your little guy around with that, and that was always the debate, because I think Atari had the advantage in that they had the simple joystick. It was just the standard. You grabbed it. It's got one button. It's like you can't mess it up. Yep.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't on the top. It was actually on the pad. So
okay.
You would hold it like this, and then with the other hand you would push the button. So I mean, it's as simple as you can get. The Intellivision was complicated, and because you had the little circle disc, but then you had all of these buttons. It looked like a telephone pad on the top.
Yeah.
And you had these inlays that you would put, like little plastics things that would slide in, and each button did something different. And if you didn't have the inlay and it was a complicated game, dude, you were messed up, man. There's no way you're going to understand how to play this game, because that little inlay told you what all of those things did. Plus, it had 4 buttons on the side too. So each of those buttons did something as well. Now, after you played the game a while, you didn't need them because then you knew what all the buttons did. You had them memorized. But again, it was the intelligent console because dummies could not play Intellivision. If you could only handle 1 button at a time, you weren't going to do well with Intellivision.
I probably wouldn't have done well with it.
And the inlays, they all came with the games, right?
Yeah.
So each game had its own one, and you
Exactly. Yeah,
it
came with 2.
It came with 2.
2 identical ones.
Okay.
And I'm gonna post a lot of pictures and videos of what you're talking about because even myself, I'm still
And I've got an old Intellivision. I've got some games with inlays, and I can even take pictures of them. And stuff.
Oh yeah, first-hand experience.
I've got I don't know, maybe about 10 Intellivision games. I'd really like to kind of build my library of it because that's like my childhood. Because I had the Intellivision. That was I was team Intellivision all the way, man. I was this little 6-year-old propagandist for Intellivision. And I would play Atari. Because my friends had it, I'd go over to their house, and there were some games I liked, but I was upper class when it came to video games. I was definitely for the Intellivision. That's what I like doing. But so Atari and Intellivision, they went for like a long time where it was just those 2 things, and then let's talk about the games real quick first. So the popular games on Atari was Pitfall. Do you guys ever play Pitfall or seen it?
There's the guy who runs across swings on vines and stuff.
And that's the classic what we were used to. No scrolling, right? You went to one side of the screen and then you went past it and then you popped on the other side, right? And it was a whole different screen. I don't know if you ever played that. It is an impossible game. It was like the Legend of Zelda for Nintendo,
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of the first adventure, and everybody wanted to play Pitfall. Like everybody, all the kids, that was like the game to play. I did not know a single person who ever won the game. You had 20 minutes to navigate this course, and you didn't know it was basically a maze. And you had 20 minutes to finish it. So really, there was 2 ways to win. The first was the non-win, which was you just lasted the 20 minutes. You never found because you had to get these different diamonds and treasure, and when you got all of them, that's how you won the game. So you had to get that in 20 minutes. But there was like a specific path. There's only one way that you could actually win. There's if you go online, you'll see maps on how to actually do it if you ever want to do it. But it's a hard game, man. I mean, you have to jump on the top of alligators' heads. And you have to swing on vines, and there's quicksand, and there's all this stuff. But anything little thing can kill you. It was really a tough game, but everybody wanted to play. It was so much fun. So that was the big game that people liked on that. And in Intellivision, it was Burger Time. Burger Time was man. I probably pulled a couple 8 and 10 hour game sessions of just playing Burger Time.
Okay.
And it worked really good. Now Atari did have Burger Time, but it wasn't as good as the Intellivisions. And then with the disc, you navigated those ladders a lot easier than with the actual joystick. So it kind of lent itself to that because if you didn't have didn't get on the ladder just right, you wouldn't be able to go up. So the disc kind of gave you a little bit more finesse in climbing it, and getting away from the pickles and the.
You're saying the Intellivision was better, or okay, gotcha.
No, for Burger Time, anyways. Yeah,
gotcha. Okay.
Now Atari was better for space games, and that's where the joystick was kind of nice because when you were shooting things and you were going around, you had a little more control with the joystick. The joystick was self-centering, so in other words, it kind of always went back to 0 whenever you got done. So if you were in Intellivision, if your character was pointing in a certain direction, it was still pointing in that direction. So if you went forward, it was going that way. But Atari always centered,
Got you. So that dial on the Intellivision controller did not go back. It didn't snap back.
Exactly.
Circle. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And that had advantages too in certain games. You didn't want to go back to 0 in certain games, but in space games where you were a ship and you wanted control of that, it was a little more harder to control with that little circle thing.
Oh, okay.
But controller wise, Atari was better. It just was, and it just simply because it was easier. And I think that's why it was the more popular console. It was a lot easier to plug and play. You didn't really have to invest any time in learning it. And in a television, you really had to invest time to learn how to use that darn paddle. And and also Atari came with a little side paddle where it came with like a little knob, and you could twist it and it would move. And so there was games like Breakout, Pong. There was one called what was it called? Kaboom. And that was an intense game because it was this guy dropping these bombs, and you had to go back and forth and catch the bombs as they went. And they would go in this pattern. And and so that was a lot of fun. But that paddle worked really nice, because you could just kind of twist and then catch it like that. Whereas in television, didn't really had something like that. You just those are the paddles. That's what you used, and that was it. So it definitely advantage with the paddle with Atari.
Yeah, I played Breakout before. That was the one that I used to play on the computer a lot, though, not on like a system. But
yeah, Breakout was fun. It was one of those games that anybody could play. And it was just kind of.
I was one of the uneducated kids that has to play.
Well,
very simple video game.
That.
I'm still playing Pong to this day.
Yeah. The other really cool thing that Intellevision had, which like it's really dumb today compared to what we have, but it had sound, like voices. And in MLB baseball and in television, it was really famous because the umpire would say, "You're out," and it was like this really mechanical. It's so dumb, but when we were kids, we're like, "Whoa, it spoke! Oh, that's awesome!" And then you could buy an actual console on Intellevision where it had games. Like there was a game I love called Space Spartans, and it was almost like in Star Wars where they're in those valleys in the Death Star, and they're fighting the stormtroopers, and or not stormtroopers, the TIE fighters, they're in the X-Wings kind of shooting. That's kind of how it was. You were kind of in a little valley, and the bad guys would kind of come out and you would shoot. And you could play the game by itself, just with the Intellevision. But if you had the voice console, the extra thing, the aliens would talk to you, and you would have messages from Missile Command coming in. And that was like super cool. That was like really ahead of its time. But they really didn't have that many games. There was maybe like 5 or 6 games that actually used it, which I think is a common thing when we talk about the Nintendo thing. They had a lot of really cool developments that, like with the Power Glove. The Power Glove was awesome. It was really fun, and they made like 3 or 4 games for it, and that was it. They really couldn't use it for much else, and it's just a waste of technology because it was a fun thing.
It was also time.
It was, and that's how that voice thing on Intellevision was. I mean, it was neat, but you really couldn't use it on too much, or I should say, there was a lot more they could have done with it if they had had time. But when that came out, that was about where we started getting towards the crash. I had mentioned in my email about the crash of '83. That was a real thing because ColecoVision came around about '82. And now ColecoVision, I never had one. I had friends who had one, and then we had a friend of the family who had one. Now ColecoVision took it up another notch. It also went backwards in a couple spots, but graphics wise, man, that was like the Donkey Kong. It was real close to the arcade version. And they had like Ladybug. They had what's the other one? Dr. Do, I think, is like the one that's it's kind of like Dig Dug, but it was like the kind of the off-brand version of it. And ColecoVision, man, I mean, they were set to take off. They really, if the crash of '83 hadn't happened, they would have been the dominant console because they were just made. And the thing about ColecoVision is you could play any Atari 2600 game on it. Atari took them to court because they developed this little console that you could plug into the ColecoVision and play any Atari game. So that was their thing. It was like, hey, why buy Atari? Buy us, and you can play all the Atari games. Instant, huge library.
Yeah.
And so they actually sued them, but they lost in court. And then what happened was Atari started actually making games for the ColecoVision. So they kind of started making money on the back end.
Well, that's
one
way to do it.
Yeah, can't beat them, join them. That's what they did. But
at this point, you had a new Atari out though, because it wasn't the same as the.
They had the 5200.
So how did that compare to the ColecoVision?
It didn't.
Graphic wise,
it was better than the Atari 2600.
Mhm.
But the ColecoVision was still better.
Oh, okay.
So now what they did was the 5200 was they made the cartridges different. So now the ColecoVision could not play the 5600 on it. But what Coleco did was brilliant. So their version of Donkey Kong that they developed for the ColecoVision was super close to the arcade version.
Mhm.
Now again, they had Donkey Kong for both Atari and Intellivision.
Mhm.
Coleco made it, but they purposely made it terrible graphics. So when the Coleco came out, they reserved the good one for them, and it came standard with every ColecoVision. So that's how they got popular right away, because everyone wanted the good Donkey Kong. Nobody wanted to play the generic Donkey Kongs that were on the other two.
Clever. So they made it for the other systems, but they just made it worse intentionally.
Intentionally.
So it wasn't because of the graphical power.
Well, I'm sure there were some limitations to it, but you know, and the memory was definitely better on the Coleco. I think it was like double than what the Intellivision was, but it wasn't such a huge thing that they couldn't have made the other ones better. They purposely dumbed it down.
Gotcha. So there's their version of standout.
Do you know how much memory we're talking about? Because I always
like
laugh.
nothing, man. Like nothing.
Yeah.
Well, Atari had 0. And then, like we were talking ROM, you know, actually on the console, because all the cartridges had the ROM in them. But Intellivision was like, I think it was 8. Was it 8? Can't remember.
Intellivision, I think you had on here. It was. Let me see if I can see it.
6 KB ROM.
Kilobyte? Yeah, 6 kilobytes.
Yeah,
that's what it was. And then the Coleco was 16. Yeah, so that was like more.
Again, that's nothing by today's standard.
No,
you don't measure anything.
Garbage.
Kilobytes anymore.
Garbage. But back then, man, that's double, right? and what was even more impressive was the sprites, because that jumped from what was it in Intellivision 8
32
to 32, and so that was the biggest difference, was the number of sprites, to making the games more like the arcade games, because real arcade games had a bunch of things happening at once. And so that's why they had to dumb them down, because you could only have so many things moving at one time. So to have 32 sprites going, you could actually get closer to what the arcades look like, you know, with that. But Coleco's downfall was that their image was they were going to have the Atom, right? The Atom computer. They were going to turn all of their ColecoVisions into these home computers, and people were going to have both the system and the home computer, and they were never going to do anything else other than use Coleco. That was their vision. But they had that vision right at the crash of 83, and that was too bad. Because it was really brilliant. I mean, you know, I've used an Atom before. I had a friend who had one who was a collector, and he turned it on for me. It's pretty neat. I mean, if you use the old Apple Macintosh ones, they're very similar, you know. It was right about that time when the Apples were starting to get popular. But it's a neat idea. It just came at the wrong time.
So then
sorry. Go ahead.
Your question is probably better. So
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to talk about the downfall that you were talking about.
Yeah.
This whole crash.
Well,
I don't know if you want to move on to that yet, or what Aaron was going to say.
Yeah, we can go to the downfall. Just a side point. It keeps popping into my head, so I just want to throw it out there real quickly. It's interesting when you said that the arcade, you talk about the comparison between the home console and arcade, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was still the concern even later, and we'll get to that. But even when you got into the NES, the Super NES, and N64 days, through the 90s, arcade hardware stayed above home console until you got to PlayStation 2, that generation.
Yep.
Then it was almost in parallel, but before that, it was always a gap. But that's kind of a side point, and I know we'll get back into that. But it's just funny that when you mention it, because now I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, that's right, because I remember going to the arcade, loving the arcade versions of some of the games that we used to play, like Street Fighter and some of the other ones that were just like amazing in the arcade, and they were definitely dumbed down for the home.
Yeah, no, it did carry, but that's also because the arcade version started getting even better, right? I mean, so the
Oh,
quality
yeah.
even got better.
Yeah.
But even like Burger Time for Nintendo isn't all that great, you know.
And that's when I first played Burger Time. It was on
Yeah,
the Nintendo.
on Nintendo, right?
Yeah.
And so when it came out on NES, I was super excited because I had just the Intellevision version in mind, and it was better in some ways. But I felt the disc gave better control for the game than the Nintendo, you know, the little cross pad that it had. And again, quality wise, the graphics weren't. I mean, they were better, but they weren't like so much better. You know, the arcade was still way better. You know,
Yeah, because the NES, that was supposed to be a stronger system, I think.
yeah, it was. Yeah, 8-bit. Right.
I'm sorry, guys. We can't really talk about Nintendo at this time, but
But yeah, we could talk about the downfall if you want now, because it all came down to E.T.
Yes.
The E.T. card.
And I played this game too.
Did you really?
I was telling Antonio earlier, my cousin had an Atari.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I remember seeing it there, but I didn't play it until much later. Like, I don't think I played the Atari until like the 90s.
Right. Okay. So
but
more of a retro thing, right?
It was, yeah. And he kept, you know, it was in the basement, but I remember seeing it over his house.
Yeah.
And so it's so funny because later on when I started hearing the stories, which we're about to get into right now, about the game, I remember playing that game. Yeah. I didn't think nothing of it.
Yeah.
At the time. And I don't even know why he had it, because most people, I thought they sold it or got rid of it. But yeah, tell us about that.
Well, everybody had it though. Everybody, because I mean, I don't know if you guys are too young, but E.T. was so popular. I mean, and I don't know if you guys have seen it. It does not hold up. I mean, it is so inappropriate. I don't know why they thought this was a family movie. But
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it that recently. I just remember watching it and being like, "This is boring."
It is. It's long, right?
I think my dad had told me that was kind of the first time they had like product placement in a film.
Yes, yeah, with the Reese's Pieces. There you go. Look at that. Look at Aaron.
Aaron's got the poster.
As a kid, I love that movie, but you know, I haven't seen it in recent. I haven't seen that movie in recent years.
It is so inappropriate, and these kids like go everywhere. Like we would never allow it today. You know, of course, when I was a kid, I went everywhere too, so it made more sense.
Yeah, it matched the time. But now I need to watch it again, and so I can see.
Yeah, it just doesn't hold up, man. It's long, it's boring, it's a very simple plot line, you know, and so the parts that I remember being real super intense. When I watched it later, were just like, oh, it's kind of more creepy than intense. You know, it's not really. It just doesn't. But I mean, whatever. You know, at the time, it was like the #1 movie. Everybody loved it. Mm-hmm. So when they first had the idea to make the video game for it, you know, it normally took them like 6 to 7 months to design a video game, but they wanted to get it before the Christmas stuff, you know, Christmas rush of buying. So they only gave them a month to put this cartridge together. And I heard an interview with the designer, you know, of the game. Real nice guy. I mean, this is really great interview. And he said that, you know, they told him, okay, we want a month. And he's like, we normally take 6 months, but we need it in a month. Can you do it in a month? And he says, yes, we can do it in a month. So they just crammed. He goes like, they worked nonstop. Like literally one shift would go, the next shift would come in and work all night long trying to get this code written for this crappy video game. It was so terrible. But they worked nonstop for a month, 24 hours a day, all day, through weekends, everything. They got it done. He got this award from Nintendo or from Atari about, you know, thank you for doing this. It sold so many video games like within the first 2 weeks of it being released. And then after Christmas, no one bought another one.
Oh, man.
It broke records of the initial sales. And then once people played it and saw how terrible of a game it was like no one wanted it. And so it was literally like, you know, because, I mean, video games were expensive back then. These little cheap, you know, cartridges could be, you know, $20, which back then in the 80s, that was a lot of money, you know? Yeah. And you could buy them for 50 cents. I remember seeing them in store, even 7-Elevens. Like they just had them. They had a stack of video games, and there would be E.T., you know, like 50 cents if you wanted it. And nobody wanted these.
And it's hilarious to look at because there's a bunch of videos on YouTube of people playing it and talking about the history a little bit too, and seeing the glitches and issues with it. When you see the game, you're like, yeah, no wonder, because the obviously the system itself was capable of much better games. But like you said, now I didn't realize that they had developed it in a month. I do remember hearing a little bit about the story behind it. I didn't know it was a month, but that makes sense when you see the finished game.
And you could die for anything. Like anything killed you. Like they had like these like swamp bogs kind of thing that you're supposed to go around. If you just accidentally like came within just a little nick of it, you die. You're dead.
Yeah,
and you start from the bottom.
There was no collision. No collision detection.
It was so easy to die in that game that it was frustrating. And then you'd have to go all the way. There was like no start ending point, right? It wasn't like you could save and then go back to that scene. No, you would start from the very beginning. So, I mean, we were throwing some paddles when we were playing that game.
Oh, I bet.
We wanted it to be so good.
Did you
to be so good.
Did you ever finish it?
No. You hated it. We hated the game. We played it for probably about 2 weeks, and we're like, we're done with this thing. Let's play something else, man.
Now, let me ask you this: during that time, did they have, because they used to have like I know at least by the time you got to NES days, they had like you can go grab a magazine or something to help you. Did they have anything like that?
They had nothing like that.
Nintendo or did you? Or right. What about? Did you go to school and have other kids talk about it and like they give you tips and tricks and stuff like that?
No, what we did was we went over to our friend's house and showed them what we did. That was our. I mean, there's no internet. There was no magazines devoted to, like Nintendo Power was like the first, and I had the first issue. I don't even know what happened to it, but I had the very first Nintendo Power issue. With Mario on the front, and when that was like revolutionary, because we were like, whoa, this is so cool, because now that was for Mario 2, and so it had maps in there, and it had kind of tips and tricks and stuff. So, but no, that was the first that I had ever had any type of help. It was always you were on your own, or if you knew someone who was good, you'd watch them play and try to learn their tricks.
Gotcha.
That was it. I mean, because it's even hard to explain. It's even hard to kind of tell people how to do it. You have to kind of watch it, because with early games, it was really kind of an art, because you're dealing with these low res graphics. It's kind of hard to be real explicit with things. But
and I take it there was no manual that came with the game either. Like,
no, there was manuals, but they were pretty much helpless.
Okay.
I mean, they didn't do anything for you. I mean, it told you what the character was, E.T. And then here's the bad guy, the agents, and then here's the Reese's Pieces, and then here's Bob. It just gave you a general overview. They really were, those things were not informative at all.
Right.
The only time you really, like in the Intellevision one, you needed to read it because it told you what all the buttons did.
Oh well, yeah, that's true.
But with Atari, you just plugged it in and then you just went.
Yeah.
But no, there was no strategy. It was you watched. Like there was that game Venture I'd mentioned earlier on Atari. That was also kind of an adventure game. And I beat that game, but only because there was a kid down the street who had it, who was really good, and he showed me all the tricks. He showed me how to beat it. But that was it, man. It was just the neighborhood networking. You hope someone knew how to beat. That's why none of us ever beat Pitfall. We didn't know anybody who did it, so we just kept floundering. Like nowadays, we'd watch the YouTube video, and actually, they have YouTube. They have someone. Yeah. I watched it. One day. It was like 17 minutes. It took them 17 minutes to beat Pitfall, but I just watched it because I had never seen anybody beat it before. So I just had to see it once.
Yeah, I like watching walkthroughs of video games that I'd played, like when I was a kid, or like speed runs.
Right. Speed runs are fun.
Yeah.
The one with the Super Mario speed run is like my favorite with that kid. Because he like has such a, it's like quiet in his house, like nobody's celebrating except for him.
Yeah.
And it's like looking around, like no one to high five. That's the classic retro gamer.
That's the funny thing about it, though, is like only when you have that experience playing games, only you're really getting it, and to try to share it with someone else, maybe a family member, and they hate like 8 video games. For me, that's always been like the hardest part about being a quote unquote gamer, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because you're like, you don't understand. Like, this is so great. They're like, you're just sitting on your butt.
And just to put a cap on the ET thing. So there was always this urban legend that they had so many ETs left over that they went and dumped them in this field in New Mexico, right? And I had always heard that growing up, and I just never thought of it. Well, when they did that interview with that guy, They actually went and found it
and dug them up.
They
Yeah,
dug them up, and
that
there
was
was
a couple of years ago.
yeah, it was just recently, and
Yeah,
so they played one. It worked after in the dirt, in the buried for all that time. But that's a testament to the cartridges, you know.
Uh-huh.
yeah,
I
I
buy
agree with that.
yeah, I mean, like, cause I buy a Nintendo cartridges when I can. You know, I always have search for them on Craigslist, and if there's one that I don't have, I'll buy one.
Don't sleep on Bookman's, by the way.
No, I do. That's where I get a lot of them.
Mhm.
I actually I get records. I take
Mhm.
the records down, get credit, and I use that credit to buy my Nintendo games. That's kind of my little scam that I have.
Nice.
And but yeah, it's just Bookman's okay. You know, they have kind of the same ones. The ones that are always good are always going to be like $40-$50. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Anything there's
that's
even
worth it.
Nintendo 64 games, they're all the same price they were, whatever.
Yeah.
years ago.
20 years ago.
But you know the thing that I wish I had kept, because I was now we're getting into Nintendo again. See,
Gotta hold back.
Antonio,
Gotta hold back.
I'm gonna say that story. I want to say that story for the other one because that's a good story. But yeah, you know, when things went down, well, I'll just to give you an idea of how bad, because even though Atari was the one that really had the glut of the bad games, Intellivision had some bad games too, and I think they were just trying to keep up. Like, I had this game called Frog Bog, and it was two frogs on lily pads, and flies would fly above, and you had to shoot the tongue out to catch the flies, and that was the whole game. And it kept track of how many flies that you ate, and whoever had the most flies at the end of a period. And that was it. That was the game. It was so bad. And we played it, you know, we played it because we just wanted to play something different, you know. But there, and Atari had one, the Big Bad Wolf, and it was just a wolf and would blow bricks, and you were the pigs, and you were just building the house. So every time it blew bricks down, you would have to go pick up bricks and rebuild your house until he came, and that was it. And it's such a dumb game. It's such.
Wait a minute, I thought the bricks were supposed to be unblowable.
Yeah,
that's
I know, but
it's probably not a word.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter. It's just they were just making games. You know, they didn't have to make sense. We were just dumb kids. We're just playing them. I bought the Atari Flashback. It had like 96 games on there, and I went through and I said, "Man, I remember that game. I remember liking this, and this is a stupid game." You know,
Mm-hmm.
and it really kind of hit that I was like, "Man, there were a ton of really bad games for this. There were some really great games." But just because they were greedy and wanted to sell, you know, sell, there was just an insatiable market for games that the quality control. So Intellivision they designed their own games for a long time. They only allowed, was it? I'm trying to remember the companies. There was just a few companies they allowed to kind of make third-party games for the Intellivision.
Mm-hmm.
Atari let anybody make games. Activision
Yeah.
was like the number one company that made games for Atari. But I mean, there was all kinds of crazy, you know, just really nonsense games that came out.
And that contributed to the crash too.
That was it. That was yeah.
No type of what's the word I'm looking for? Like no filters, no quality control. Yeah, no quality control at all.
And so ET kind of pushed it over the top because I think there had already been a lot of bad games, but then we just didn't play them, right? If we saw them, we put them in the corner. But we wanted to like ET
because of the marketing muscle behind the movie. And
yes.
I'm just going to say that from that point on, even till today, believe it or not, a lot of games that are based on movies, the expectation for most of them is pretty low.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been countless Star Wars games, countless, you know, you name it, you know, even especially, you know, during the 90s, Disney movies were always converted into games and a ton of others. And usually the movie, if it's a game that's based off a movie, if it's a game based off of a movie, the game was going to be garbage. Mm-hmm. And that has stood the test of time to today.
But the book was always good, so hey.
The book was good, but the video game was always trash. Like I say, even today, when they make movies, when they make games based off movies, it's always going to be hit or miss. It's hit or miss.
Well, here's the thing, though. Intellivision had some pretty awesome Tron games.
Mm-hmm.
So they had the racers, you know, with the light, and so it was kind of like a it's like a puzzle, right? You had to kind of trap the other person.
Uh-huh.
That was a fun game. And they had this other one called Tron Solar Sail, which I had as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. I mean, they really Intellivision had some really fun experiments, with that. Another game that was really cool, because television, you can kind of have strategy in it. Like there was this one called Sub Hunt, and it was the way I would compare it is kind of like Battleship,
Okay.
but the ships moved. You could move the ships, so you couldn't see where the other guy was. You had a screen, so you had kind of partially your screen, and they are there, so you had to kind of shoot. Missiles, and each they had like a PT boat which was fast and moved around, but you had to be close range to hit. Then they had the bigger destroyer, which had long range missiles, but you moved real slow, so it was kind of an easy target.
Well, how did you divide up the screen so that the other person couldn't see the
it
screen?
it was total, like, you had to like what do you call it, be on. It was like the honor system. So you had to promise you're only going to look on your screen. I mean, it's not perfect because you did. Yeah.
I would have to put like a cardboard box or something. Like a cardboard to divide.
But it was still really challenging because it would come from the top of the screen down, so it wasn't always like a perfect thing. But I mean, we play hours on that thing, and I got pretty good at it. So I would because we would play, whoever would win kept they stayed on, kind of like basketball, like playground basketball. If you won, you stayed on it, and someone else would challenge you. And sometimes I would run the table on everybody, and they hated me.
So when you say that you liked a certain game, would you say it's the competition aspect of it? Because that's something
Absolutely.
I really liked.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because who you're playing with, so if you had guys who were really good, then it was a lot of fun, and I think Intellivision, more so than Atari, kind of led towards like the sports type, like the Madden. I think Madden football is based off of Intellivision football, because it was the first where you really felt in control of your players, and you needed a certain amount of skill. Like Atari football was terrible. Again, it was just three guys huddled together. They moved in one thing, and it just never felt like there was much skill. It was almost like you had to just not make you had to make less mistakes than your opponent in order to win. But with Intellivision, you actually had skill in all the sports games, and especially the football one, which scrolled. You'd throw a pass, and you'd have to kind of run to go catch the pass. And so it did have a little bit of skill. So that translated over to the Nintendo, Antonio. And to
We're just going to bleep that out.
So I don't know. I think there was just a lot of really positive things that Intellivision brought, and just never got the notoriety. They just never, they just never were able to get over the hump on it. But that's the way it goes.
Well, I just think from our discussion, I've always talked to people, and they've always had glamorous memories of the arcade. I think you're the only person I've really talked to that actually talks about home gaming as something that they're passionate about.
Well, that's because arcade costs money. You'd have to. I mean, we'd ride on our bikes, because there was arcade. Like we would ride to a 7-Eleven, but we were at the mercy of whatever games are at 7-Eleven. And they change them out every couple months. But with our home console, we could pick the games, and so that we had a lot more opportunity to kind of invest time in that. Whereas we'd ride our bikes, and our pants would be jiggling with so many quarters in our pockets, and then we go there, and in 45 minutes it's gone.
Yeah.
Now what do? All our quarters are gone.
Yeah.
But we could spend hours just at someone's house. And also, I think the fun thing of, hey, I got a new game, I'll bring it over. That kind of was a cool camaraderie building type thing, to, hey, I've got something, I'm going to share with them. And then we all got to benefit from their purchase, but you can't do that in the arcades. The arcades are there, you show up there, and, but again, they had their thing. Like we had a track and field. I don't remember that old arcade game where you had to hit the buttons. You're all and then jump, and they had to jump over the. Sorry, They had track and field for NES again, and that was a fun thing. But the arcade version of track and field was so much fun, and we would have, because you would hit the buttons for right left to run, and then jump. So we'd have two people at the arcade. one of them would be the running guy and the other would be the jump guy, and that's how we would try and beat the game. So that was cool because one quarter could have two people busy on it. But again, once you ran out of the quarters, then I guess it's time to go play basketball because you were done.
Yeah, you never really see that scene in the movies though, where the kids run out of quarters at the arcade.
Yeah.
Right. And renting was not an option at this point.
Oh no, there was no such thing as renting. No, you bought. It wasn't until Nintendo came around. Once Blockbuster was big, then you could rent Nintendo games. But even that was very rare. It was more the once Super Nintendo came, then it was kind of more everybody rented after that. After Super Nintendo, that was pretty standard. Although Blockbuster, when I worked at Blockbuster, they still had old Nintendo, the NES games there too. But no, back then it was like if someone had the game, they had it. But that was kind of cool too, because we would hear rumors that somebody at the school had this game that we all wanted to play, and then we would all kind of, hey, how's it going? What's new?
Right. I don't really like you, but I heard that you got this game. So
yeah. Exactly.
Hey, I do that to Aaron like all the time now.
Absolutely.
I think I'm actually borrowing one of your video games right now.
Oh, that's right. You do. Yes.
Yeah.
I just remembered that.
Aaron's the single guy who has the whole catalog. So.
Hey, I have a question. It's kind of a nerd question, I guess you could say, about the development. So and this is one thing I was not able to find. I did a quick search for it, but I couldn't find the answer, and you might know it. When it came to developing these games for Atari, for Coleco, for Intellevision, nowadays they have development kits that the console manufacturers send out. Back then, did any of those systems use that, or were you basically coding on a PC? And did they use similar code for each? Like, was it the same type of code for each?
Yeah. So I do know it was the same code. Because developers went from both Atari 2 and Intellevision. They kind of were interchangeable. So they went back. So I know it was
same code.
Yeah, I don't know what the code was though. I don't know if it was like Fortran or Cobalt or what, some of those older language. I really don't know that. But I do know that the developers did hop back and forth. But as far as I think it was directly on the cartridge. I think that's what they programmed it on. I think it was just once they got their code, they put it on a chip and put it on the cartridge, and that was it.
So that would if that's the case, then that would explain why you were able to play Atari games on the ColecoVision.
The Coleco, right? Yep.
If it was all coded in the same language, then that would make sense.
Yep. Although you did need to have a module put into the Coleco, to read the cartridge, but I believe it was the same language. I think it was just the cartridge was a different size, so you needed one to
make sense. Yeah.
So at what point did you kind of stop investing in video games, I guess, would you say?
So I was pretty active all through my youth up until Super Nintendo. So that was kind of when I started getting older, that was around 92. I'm high school now. I'm graduating. I started getting towards adulthood and just didn't have time to play around as much. But I was very active all through the, from 85 to the 90s with NES. So I pretty much know a lot of that, and I know. I'm still a big fan of the SNES, but I don't have as much experience just because that's the time when I started tapering off a little bit. So I don't know as much about the games or the deals on it. But
don't worry about that. I'll fill you in.
That sounds good.
Aaron picks up the baton and keeps running.
Oh yeah, got you, Gabe. Don't worry.
And I do have an SNES. I have an original one as well, and I have a bunch of games for it. My favorites are the Donkey Kong Country games, the 3.
Oh yeah,
playing those, and then Mario Kart, OG Mario Kart.
Yeah, that's when Mario Kart first started. SNES.
In fact, me and my daughter still we play the old Mario Kart still. I have the mini, the SNES mini.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like I don't think you should start kids off on like these 3D games. You should always start with like the 2D ones because those ones are just as entertaining when you're a kid.
For kids, yeah.
And like my daughter, she enjoys them more because we have a Wii. I mean, I've never really invest in anything super big. Like I never was in the Xbox or not even a Switch. I'd love to have a Switch, but
I'm sorry, Gabe, we got to stop you right here. You can't join our club anymore.
Oh no, I will get one. I'm just saying, right now, it's just not the right time. But my daughter, because we had the Wii and we played, I got her some games and she was all right. And when I pulled out because I got the NES Classic first when it first came out,
Mm-hmm.
she loved it, and of course I was ecstatic because those are all my favorite games. So played that. We played it in tons and tons, and then she loves the original Super Mario Brothers, and some of the other ones. And then we got the SNES, and then it was like even another one. So we keep those ones in the house now, and if we ever want to play, that's what we pull out. Although we still have the Wii there too. She had a couple little kid games on there that she liked, but definitely she's like, no, let's play the Nintendo or Super Nintendo.
So, nice.
I always think it's funny because I hear people, that I had worked with in a shop I worked with one time, they were just saying like how they're going to buy the new Xbox for like a 6-year-old. You got like this super engine, like video games where all it is like racing and shooting and all this stuff. And you're like, they don't really need that. It's way too much like input, I would think, for like a 6-year-old. But
yeah, no, it is. It's a lot. It's a lot stimulation,
Well, I think part of it is that a lot of the parents want to play it too.
Well, yeah, that too.
So they use the kids as an excuse, but really it's for them.
I bought the Switch for Anna, so yeah,
well, of course you did.
you're such a generous husband.
Like, hey,
nice.
Oh, man. But yeah,
well, that's cool. It's cool to be able to talk about the that kind of like trio of systems, because those three have the biggest impact. There was others, of course, but those were, I think, were the three main ones: the Atari, the Coleco, and the Intellevision. And
and I think the testament to that is the fact that I was 6 to 8 years old when that happened, and I was fully aware of industry things, of what was coming out, and I'm just a kid, and I'm like, oh, this, I'm saying things like, oh, this game is going to be released at this date, how did I know that stuff, And it's
marketing.
Man, it was kind of an awakening for me, like not only just for the games, but business wise, but that was the incentive was, for me to kind of hear things or latch, or read things in the paper, and then they would put out these advertisements and, oh, we can't wait till this game, there was a game, a Mega Mania for the Atari, and it had this cool, music that came on with the commercial, and the commercials came out about a month before they were released. I wanted to play that game so bad, and a friend of mine down the street got it like about a few weeks after it was released, and I mean we went over there, and Saturday afternoon, we were there for about 4 hours playing this new game, and it was the first time marketing was actually affecting decisions that I made, that I was aware of, that I made a conscious decision to play a game, not just whatever game was in front of me, available to me. It was like, no, I want to play that game. And it's just kind of scary. And when it taps into, you see how powerful marketing is, where you've got a time where there is no internet, there is no special magazines or clubs or things like that for this, and yet I, 6-year-old, knew exactly what was happening. 7-year-old, knew exactly what was happening. So, pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, especially now with the internet and like radio, TV, all that stuff.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and there's been this for the last 3 years. There have been rumors of this new Intellevision Numiko that's supposed to come out. And it's supposed to be like a retrified console that plays that like rejuvenated the old Intellivision games. And I'm not sure if it came out yet or not. I don't think it did, or it did come out and it really hadn't like not a lot of fanfare to it. But I was real excited when I was like, you take my money, man. It's that meme with the
shut up and take my money.
That was me. I'm like, I don't care. You tell me the day, you tell me the place. Here is my credit card. I will buy it. I don't care if it's going to be bad. I just want to buy it.
I mean, I can come up with something if you'd like. Just write Intellevision on a box.
Do it, man. Do it. I'll buy it.
Hey, that just reminded me of something. Atari actually released
they did a newer console.
Yes, I think, and it's funded on Kickstarter.
Yeah, I don't think that ever went anywhere either.
I don't think so, but I think They made an announcement recently saying that the people who backed it are going to start getting their systems in June.
Oh,
So
okay.
this month.
Oh, that's
And
very
then,
interesting.
yeah, so the backers are going to start getting their games, and then soon, I guess, more people will start getting it. In other words, it's still a work in progress. They haven't given up on it yet.
Right. That's
But
good.
I thought that was pretty cool. Of course, it's the marketing for it is not very clear. It's not just a retro system. It's also a
No.
modern system.
Right, and that's the same thing with the Namiko. They're trying to open it up where if you buy it, not only can you play the old games that are new, but that developers will be able to make games like for it. In other words, that it can be used for newer games, but just with that old style. But they were going to clean it up and make it a little more modern looking and make the graphics a little better, but still try to keep the old feel. I mean, that was the thought process, but like I said, it hasn't come through yet. But just on that particular topic, in the retro gaming kind of field, there's always the people who are like, oh no, I don't like these flashback devices. I don't like these. Like there's a big, people don't like the minis, the NES minis, and then they have the Atari flashback, and then they have the Intellivision one, same thing. I'm all for it. The controllers are usually not as good as the original controllers, but the games are the same games. And if it's easier than me having to lug out an old system and have all of these extra connectors to try to make it work on a modern TV, and I'm trying to blow into cartridges to get it to connect right, and all of this, if I can just plug it into a HDMI cable and play the old games, I'm not going to play it the whole day. I just want to, get a little nostalgia hit. I think
you're going to play the whole day, Gabe. We know.
I've got a wife and a daughter. They're not going to let me play the whole day.
How did you plug in the old systems then to a TV?
Oh, I have a CRT. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah.
But what were they before? Like, would it plug in? It was the antenna, right, or something like that.
Yeah, it was. Those little. If you remember the screws,
the
two little screws, and it had like these two little fork connectors. You'd plug it in there, tighten it, and then it had like this little on-off switch that you would plug in. And I have that. I have the original NES connector like that. So.
Oh wow.
Because if you want to play Duck Hunt use the gun, you have to have the old TVs. They won't work on the flat screens.
Wow. And how big were these TVs you're playing video games on?
Well, back then, I mean, they were, full, 30-inch, huge, those ones that look like cabinets.
Yeah.
Those are the ones we were playing on, those big TV. That was the best, but the one that I have isn't that big. It's pretty small, but it works,
Yeah.
So, but I have a little storage area I'm going to turn into an office for my business, but I'm hoping to have a little corner where I can make it my little gaming area. I can have all my my old TV and then my old, system, and then also a flat screen as well for the minis and the flashes, and just have a bunch of switches. What do I want to play today? I'll play Atari Switch. I want to play Intellivision Switch. That's my goal. But
that's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a collector's thing. It's nostalgia. I'm a sucker for it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing with us all that info about Atari and Intellivision.
And not NES.
And not NES. To be completely honest, I know what Atari is, but I never heard of this other stuff. And even what you're talking about, I'm going to have to look up a lot of videos.
Well, come over. I'll have you over once the COVID thing's over, and I'll let you play my Flash. Or I can even lend it to you if you want, man. Although I probably have to be there to explain stuff to you. I don't know.
Okay. No, I'm just looking up.
Especially the Intellivision stuff. You'll never understand that. That's the intelligent vision. Atari, you might muddle through it. But...
to this day, only intelligent people can play.
So, would you like to build some anticipation for the next episode?
Sure, man. Well, after the crash happened, we were thirsty. We were thirsty for some video games because there was about 2 years of, we were just playing the same games over and over. Thankfully,
video game time, that is an eternity.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And even back then it was, because we were used to getting new releases about every 2 or 3 months. Some new game would come out, and now nothing was coming out. So then when we heard about this system that had a robot, oh man, And I'll tell you all about that on the next podcast.
I cannot wait. That's gonna be good. That's I cannot wait because NES is. I love that.
Yeah,
that was my first console, and yeah, good memories. So we'll talk.
I played
about
like
that.
Duck Hunt like once, and then we had the N64, so that was my system.
You're such a baby.
Yep.
So this has been Two Crazy Scoops Podcast with your hosts Ayo and Antino and our special guest Gabriel Gutierrez. Stay tuned for his next episode when we have more discussions about the NES this time and Nintendo. So stay tuned.